Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hello and welcome back to League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you guys as we continue our preview for the 2021 World Championship. And we gotta ease in to when you do the top 20 players, because that is the iconic preview, what everybody does from every different piece of network entertainment, anything covered league. You got to do your top 20, but we're easing in by doing a top 10 list for each role first to start narrowing it down.
Yeah, I think a top 10 list, it's easier to put in people's minds what you're trying to get across with this. 'Cause I think sometimes people look at the top 20 list for the World Championship, looking at these players, and they take it a little bit too hard, too harshly, looking at some of these things and their rankings. A top 10 list, it's a little easier for people to acknowledge and put the praise towards that upper half of players at this point. That's what this is. This is supposed to be a celebration of the greatness of these players.
And, you know, the bottom five of all these lists, they're not sniffing the top 20 overall players because there's just not enough spots. If you're going to have 7 top laners, well, you got 13 spots left for all 4 other roles. That's not going to cut it. It's not going to work. So we're going top laners 10 to 1, and we're just giving you all on the board right away, and we're going to talk about them. And because we're seeing them all, let's start at the top of the table. Is anyone going to argue Xiaohu against him being number 1 on this? You can't, right?
I don't think you can make that argument given what we have seen all year round. Not just talking about a single split, talking about the most recent one was summer or even a playoff run. You're looking at the entirety of the year as the answer of, is this going to be a good role swap for RNG? Is this going to work out to the extremes that it has to for RNG to be successful? Well, you look at the past year, Spring Championship, MSI Champions, the way that Xiaohu has played throughout spring and summer, the consistency and the consistent dominance that he has had in that top lane. I'm looking around the world, and yes, there are absolutely some other big dogs in that top lane to talk about, but you gotta put some respect on the absolute brilliance that we have seen from Xiaohu all year long.
And one of the few players and squads that a lot of the time the entire comp or game plan is centered around top lane. That's not many teams are doing that in 2021. So big shout out to RNG for winning MSI and winning a split with that as their main recipe. Behind him, we've got a couple of guys who obviously in their peak, they're right at number 1 on this list. We're talking Khan and Nuggery. I'm willing to accept maybe if you're flip-flopping these guys. I think they do have to go 2-3, even though Khan is not at his peak at the end of summer. I feel like in the middle of the split, he was playing a little bit better, whereas Nuggery has slowly started to come online throughout that playoff run for FPX. But remember, he was getting benched in the middle of the season.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, you know, the time that Khan spent last year with FPX and everything that how it went
the
there.
Trade.
Exactly. And you look at it this year and the overall performance, and yes, Khan gets that extra boost alongside with the coaching staff, having Coma there and helping unlock that next level of play and stability from Khan in the top side. As you said, not at his peak level, though. So all those things are in his corner, and we're still not at that top level or, you know, the highest of highs that we have been able to see this year from Khan when he has dominated. On the other side is the swap over, is Nuggery with FPX and what he has done. And as you said, benched, you know, hitting that pine for the little bit of the time in summer has not stopped his comeback as far as towards the end of summer and in playoffs, the way that he looked and how he played. As you said, these are 2 players that at their very peak, they're in that conversation for that number 1 spot alongside Xiaohu and, you know, respectfully alongside, not just, you know, throwing them down. They're in that conversation. But right now, both of them are just slightly off of their peak for different reasons and at different times. Can't have them ranked ahead of your boy Xiaohu.
Yeah, but when they're not at their peak and they're still number 2 or 3 at an international event, that just speaks to the talent level that these guys do have. Speaking of a guy who knows what it's like to be benched, number 4, we got Kana. And he absolutely turned it up to another level in playoffs against both Gen G and against Hanwha Life. And I will be willing to go out a limb and guarantee at least a couple Kennen bans come in the way of T1. At least a couple.
If you want to make sure that you're not having the loser POV, you absolutely better be banning out the Kennen against Kana and what he has done. The growth is the big one for me with Kana, because yes, as we knew what we had seen from him in the past, such a young player that had the potential to be at the high levels that when Xiaohu, Nuguri, Khan, those players are dominating. Kana has the highest of highs to get to that level, but he is such a young player that you see inexperience. You see those mistakes, overreaching. These type of things happen with Kana a little bit more often than you still see sometimes with players like Kana and whatnot. So looking at Kana and what he can provide, as you said, pick and ban against him specifically as a young player is going to be a big difference maker for teams. But what he can do, the way he can pop off, it is all fantastic if you're on the T1 fan base.
And we've seen less of those oversteps and inconsistencies throughout that playoff run and the series against Hanwha Life, where that Kana versus Morgan matchup was far and away the most lopsided one in that 5-game set. 5 spot, you have Flandre followed by Armut, who are a couple of guys who, Flandre in particular, not getting much attention. When you're on EDG, when you have Scout and Viper, he's the weak side king. But we've seen him turn around dives. We've seen him survive and carry some games in his own right. It's kind of been a resurgence since he's been on EDG. And it can be similar for Armut on Mad Lions.
Yeah, these two are extremely interesting to talk about and examine, because just coming off of Kana and looking at Flandre, you can have some arguments about wanting to put Flandre ahead of Kana and what you value at this point in the power ranking for these players. But for me, the difference is when you see Flandre and what we talked about. We were talking about Flandre quite a bit during spring, the job that he was doing, the additions that came over to EDG. But the fact that we wanted to talk about Flandre and the job that he was doing, how fantastic that was, less of that in the summer. It was a little bit of a regression, a bit of a fallback. And whether that's, individually on him or the way things also went with EDG, that's a different discussion. But sure, looking at this type of power ranking and where he falls in behind Kana, I'm comfortable with Flandre in this spot. But if you're sitting in the chair facing off against Flandre, I doubt you're feeling pretty confident.
He seems to be an immovable object at times, much like Armut, who didn't even need to pull out his Wukong pocket pick. He was styling on Adam picking his pocket pick, showing him how to do it. He has been an absolute, not just on the Rift, but the personality and behind the scenes that he's brought to Mad Lions has been so huge for them. A guy who was in the TCL, now we're talking about him at number 6 on the World Top Lane rankings. Right behind him is Alfari, and you might say this is a little bit too high potentially for him because we didn't quite see the peak moments that we saw in spring. Obviously, there was all the drama behind the scenes with Team Liquid, but he's still absolutely a world-class top laner.
Yeah, and my biggest thing is when it mattered most for Team Liquid, when you're looking at that playoff series that they had to do and how they dominated in those games, you're looking at Alfari and Santorin, that job that top jungle was able to get across. And the other thing that's so unbelievably impressive, then you think about that, you look at some of the lengths that these teams had to go to try and take advantages away, put Alfari behind, putting so much invested into that in the pick and ban and the draft strategy that even though they did all that, they still couldn't get your man down, put him behind. That is the type of player that Alfari is. It's fantastic that we do get to finally see him at one of these events. The origin days are long gone for Alfari.
Thank goodness we're seeing him back at Worlds, first time since 2017. Behind him, you have Ale, who you could compare to Kana because he's a younger player. He has the highest of highs, but he, even more so than Kana lately, has had moments where he's going 0-5 on Viego, getting caught out, dying unnecessarily, but the talent level is still absolutely there. Adam is one of the most interesting ones on this list because the guy's played one split, and we're already putting him into the top 10, and the answer is, how are you doing that? I mean, watch his games, guys. Watch Adam's games. He's one of the most important players on Fnatic, and that's why you saw Mad Lions and G2 at times throwing bans his way because they understand that he is the focal point.
He is a focus point. The way that he can play is absolutely that of a carry. He's got that mindset even as a young player, right? Of saying put the onus on me and I will cash in. I will perform for the squad. That's what we have seen from Adam. Doesn't matter if it was week 1 of the summer split all the way until the very end. He had that confidence. He brought him, and you could see decision making in game. You love what he brings for Fnatic, the way that he has worked with the rest of the team, the way that he has provided advantages when he's gotten them with the rest of the squad. He has been perfect. And I say that, meaning that word to the, definition. He has been perfect as an addition for this Fnatic team and what he brings. And in only his rookie split, so much excitement.
His only question mark is going to be that champion pool, because as we mentioned, we've seen teams kind of target him when he has to fall back onto these Cho'Gaths or Mordekaisers that are kind of off meta at the moment. It's something to take advantage of, especially with a young player. But Fnatic should actually be happy to go through play-ins when they have Adam to get him as many international stage games as possible.
Absolutely, and especially in the way that, we know these play-in stages games can be, where, you can't take an NA stance and you can't be looking past anybody at this situation to be, at this level at the world play-ins. But still, this level of experience, the very slightly less pressure than being at the actual group stage for the event is going to be better starting ground for Adam and Fnatic.
And right behind him, Rascal is number 10. I wanted to put Fudge there. You maybe could make an argument, but you just felt like because of how Cloud9's season kind of ended, that Rascal does get the nod there, but I will accept arguments for Fudge. That is it for the top lane rankings. It's the first of many of these rankings for Worlds 2021. Thank you guys for hanging. We'll catch you on that flippity flip.